We are going to live in this house as a family. You should be grateful, you know? My mother-in-law said, looking down at me with a gentle smile. How rude she is. She said that despite the fact that my mother had passed away from illness not long ago, it was certainly unpleasant to hear my mother-in-law, with whom I had no connection, cheerfully talk about renovating the house. She came suddenly, even though the funeral hadn't taken place yet, without offering a single word of condolence. Instead, there she was, talking happily about living with her son, ignoring me as I was consumed by tears. It seems to her the family only includes her son, and I am like an outsider. She waved her hand at me as if she was shooing away a pest. I'm saying we'll live as a family. Did you think a daughter-in-law with no blood relation would be treated as family? My name is Tracy, and I'm 30 years old. I have an older brother I respect, who is 5 years older than me. We've always been very close, and he has always been there to help me on anything. When I was having trouble with friends in elementary school, he would go directly to them and ask them to be kind to me for my sake. He might be a bit overprotective, but he's a reliable brother who cares deeply for his sister. During my rebellious phase in middle and high school, he often confronted our parents strongly, but he always treated me warmly. He was always there to support me when I was in trouble, a person I could rely on. Don't worry about what others think. I support you, Tracy, he would say, and I used to be envious of his attitude. He also said, when our father passed away from cancer during my university years, I was truly grateful to my teachers and parents. They were the ones who always thought of me and scolded me as he reflected on his past, which was surprising to hear from my once mischievous brother. It was rare to hear him talk about the past, and it made me want to become a respected figure like his teachers and our parents. This experience nurtured in me a desire to support children in their growth and those facing difficulties, leading me to choose a career in teaching. While everyone around me was busy job hunting, I focused solely on preparing for the teacher recruitment exams. I still remember the surprised look on my brother's face when I passed the exam and told him and our mother, "Congratulations. I never thought you would become a teacher, Tracy. Good luck," he said, supporting me. Despite landing my dream job in teaching, reality was not as sweet as I had expected. I was busy every day with lesson preparations and student guidance, with late work becoming the norm. As remote work became more widespread, those in the teaching profession had no such option, forcing me to commute on crowded trains every morning. Weekends and holidays often required attendance for club activities. Additionally, living independently and managing a household as an adult made me acutely aware of the difficulties of domestic tasks. I remember struggling both physically and mentally in my first year as a working adult. Yet, I felt fulfilled in my role as an educator. As I became more accustomed to my teaching life, I started noticing odd behaviors and words from my mother. Conversations over the phone became difficult, and she would quickly forget things we had just talked about. Concerned, I visited my family home and was shocked to see garbage scattered everywhere. My normally tidy mother was confused about why things had gotten to that point, saying she had forgotten to take out the trash or that she had already cleaned up. Sharing the situation with my brother, we decided to go to the hospital together, where the diagnosis was unexpected. Our mother was diagnosed with dementia. Though it was early-stage mild cognitive impairment, her communication with other people had decreased since our father's passing, and her condition had gradually become more apparent. This situation increased my interactions with my brother and naturally led to more frequent visits to our family home. During these visits, my brother and I often discussed the future. Amidst my busy life, a friend introduced me to Steve when I was too overwhelmed with work and household management to find any personal enjoyment. My friend, insisting I needed time to relax, invited me out for drinks, where I met Steve. He worked for a foreign company and was deeply interested in the international aspect of my job as a French teacher. He was sincere and always prioritized me. The time spent with Steve was a happy moment in my busy days. Just having a meal together for a short while made all the fatigue disappear. I was drawn to him, and after dating for 2 years, on a day that wasn't special, he reserved a private room in a restaurant in New York City for us. Unexpectedly, he gave me a ring and proposed, saying, "I want to make you happy, Tracy. I want to marry you," but I couldn't answer right away. The reason was the anticipated burden of caring for my mother as her condition worsened. Steve was aware of my mother's situation, but I hesitated to involve him in this issue. Nonetheless, he encouraged me, saying, "If you're worried about your mother's situation, don't be. I want to support her together with you." I remember barely being able to say yes through my tears. When I decided to marry Steve at 27, we discussed it in advance and also consulted with my brother about my mother's future. As a result, we decided to build a duplex house where we could live together with my mother, using our marriage as the opportunity. From then on, I started receiving more frequent contacts from my mother-in-law. Before the marriage, my interaction with her was limited to greetings and face-to-face meetings. Initially, I felt her interest was minimal, but I sensed a reason behind her frequent recent contacts. Eventually, it became clear that the main content of these contacts was about the new house we plan to build. "I heard you're building a new house. What's the floor plan like? I'm curious about my son's new home. Can I see it?" As soon as we started talking, she made countless suggestions about the house's design, such as, "The kitchen would be better if it were larger. The staircase would be more suitable here, not there. Why not make the room next to the living room a guest room? Floor heating is a must since this area gets quite cold in the winter." I was uncomfortable with my mother-in-law, who wasn't going to live with us, meddling, but Steve stepped in to mediate to avoid conflict. Despite this, my mother-in-law persistently contacted me directly. Suspecting some ulterior motive, I discussed it with Steve. "Your mother's behavior feels like she plans to live there herself. I'm worried she might be plotting something. Even if you talk to her, she contacts me directly, and I don't know how to respond. Yeah, there must be some reason for that. Don't worry, I'll handle it from now on. You can ignore all contacts from my mom. But won't she feel bad about that? It's fine. She's acting out of line. I'll talk to her. However, given her nature, she might try to contact you again. In that case, it's okay to avoid her call and ignore it." With Steve's support, I avoided further contact with my mother-in-law. The house design was finalized, and construction on the new home began. We planned to move into the new house in 6 months, and packing was going smoothly when the contacts with my mother-in-law had almost ceased. Steve informed his mother of the completion date of the new house, but she didn't seem to react much. Half a year passed, and the new house was completed. The first floor was arranged with a living room, kitchen, and a spacious room for my mother, while the second floor was our couple's space with individual rooms. However, by the time the new house was completed, my mother's health had begun to decline. During the day, when we were at work, my mother spent a lot of time alone, and I often came home to find the house in disarray. The doctor had warned that limiting her activities could lead to a rapid progression of her symptoms, so we had her do small tasks during the day. Yet, actions that had been easy for her became increasingly difficult. While she retained her cooking ability, she often left pans on the stove after use. She would forget to add detergent when using the washing machine or add too much, resulting in excessive foam. Despite having the newspaper right beside her, she would complain, "The newspaper didn't come today," until the evening. The challenges posed by my mother's condition were countless, and my brother and I decided to use daycare services during the day. At first, my mother was confused by the unfamiliar environment, but having companions during the day gradually made her smile more. When she came home, she would talk about making paper crafts or participating in events at the children's center. My mother gradually adapted to this new routine, and her condition seemed to temporarily stabilize, but it didn't last long. Just 2 years later, my mother seemed to have caught an off-season cold, but ultimately, she passed away from pneumonia. Just maintaining daily life seemed to deplete her strength, and she couldn't eat properly due to a lack of appetite, leading to a weakened immune system. I couldn't stop crying and couldn't recover from the sudden event. Yet, Administrative tasks such as contacting the city hall, notifying relatives, and arranging funeral services piled up and waited for no one. As I began to prepare for the funeral, my mother-in-law arrived with a lot of luggage. Seeing her ready to stay over, I was grateful she came to help with the funeral preparations and welcomed her, saying, "Thank you so much for coming during this busy time. Please come in." However, as soon as she stepped inside, she made an unexpected statement. "I will live in this house." Surprised and at a loss for words, I couldn't make a rebuttal when she said, "If you don't like it, you can leave. Steve and I will live here." She said that without a word of condolence. I was utterly confused by her sudden, self-centered declaration. Ignoring my bewilderment, my mother-in-law continued, "I've waited 2 years, and finally, I can live here. How about it? Is the floor plan to my liking?" As she began to walk around the house. At that moment, I understood why she had been contacting us so frequently before. Perhaps she had always intended to move into the home we built. She tried to change the floor plan to her liking and believed that I should receive her instructions rather than Steve, which might explain her persistent contacts. She seemed to have rushed over after hearing about my mother's death from Steve. That's when the shocked Steve said, "Mom, didn't you know? The owner of this house isn't me. It was Tracy's mother." What? Moreover, when Tracy's mother passed away, the heir would be Tracy's brother. What does that mean? My mother-in-law, glaring at me, said, "The homeowner should be the husband. Steve earns more, and your salary couldn't possibly cover the mortgage. You must be relying entirely on Steve's earnings. This house might as well be Steve's." Really, what an incomprehensible daughter-in-law and her family. "What do you think, Steve?" Steve tried to explain. "No, Mom. Listen, it's okay, Steve. Let me explain," I interjected. My mother-in-law turned her sharp gaze from Steve to me and challenged, "What are you trying to say?" "The mortgage is being paid by my brother and me. I cover the payments with my income, and I have never taken money from Steve. Is that true, Steve?" "Yes, it's true." I continued, "When we built this house, we decided it would eventually go to my brother. Now that my mother has passed away, the home will be for my brother, his wife, and her parents to live in," I explained calmly. My mother-in-law was stunned and speechless, but unable to accept the arrangement. She said, "I can't accept that. After living with and caring for your parents, it's natural that it would be my turn next. I've been waiting for this day. This is too unreasonable. You know, I have a lawyer acquaintance. I'll talk to him and proceed with renouncing the inheritance." Of course, we had no intention of doing so, but my mother-in-law was clearly agitated. "My brother will be arriving soon, so let's discuss this again when he's here. I will express my opinion directly to your brother and ask for his renunciation. I'm the type to speak my mind, so my position won't change even when your brother arrives." After this statement, my mother-in-law waited in the living room until my brother arrived. Steve, while confused, repeatedly apologized to me. "Don't worry. It seems she won't be convinced by just my word, so let's talk again with my mother when my brother arrives." Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was on the phone with a lawyer she knew, moving forward with the discussion on renouncing the inheritance. Regarding the renunciation of inheritance, yes, I believe the person in question will agree. Yes, please prepare the necessary documents if there's progress. My mother-in-law spoke politely on the phone. About an hour later, the sound of a car parking outside was heard. My brother had arrived. "Mother, my brother has arrived." As I called out to her, she stood up eagerly, saying, "I will have this house transferred to Steve. Then I can live here," and proceeded to the living room. At that moment, the living room door opened, and my brother appeared. My mother-in-law, about to shout something, took a deep breath and opened her mouth wide. But as she opened her mouth, no sound came out, and she looked surprised, losing her strength and sitting down heavily. In fact, my brother's appearance could be mistaken for someone from the underworld by some due to his quite intimidating look. His hobby is surfing. Furthermore, as he works outdoors throughout the year, his skin is sunburned, and the sun damage has made his hair brittle. As a result, finding hair maintenance troublesome, he chose to have a shaved head. Also, he is tall and has a muscular and sturdy physique. Especially noticeable is an old scar on his forehead. This scar was the result of a fall during his elementary school years. But combined with his appearance, many people mistake it for a scar from a blade. Seeing such a brother in person, my mother-in-law seemed to lose her will and slumped down to sit. Do you have anything you would like to say about this house? My brother coldly asked my mother-in-law. No, I had thought I would live here after your mother passed away. But then I heard that you would be living here and I realized I understood nothing. Did Tracy tell you to live here? We had a thorough discussion about this house before it was built, so I believe there was no such conversation. He spoke in a firm tone. No, I misunderstood. Because I was involved in planning the layout with Tracy before the house was built, I assumed I had a right to live here too. My mother-in-law said, clearly confused and looking down. A right to live here? Does that mean you were offering some sort of support to my sister? No, nothing like that. So, without bearing any burden or making any promises, you just assumed you had a right to live here just by offering your opinion on the layout? Yes, I'm sorry. It was my misunderstanding. At first, my brother looked at me suspiciously, but he refuted my mother-in-law's unreasonable claim with disgust. However, to my mother-in-law, it seemed more like anger than disgust, and she apologized deeply, becoming surprisingly docile. Just because our mother passed away doesn't mean there was ever a discussion about living with my sisters-in-laws. Right, Tracy? Of course. I never discussed the details of this house with my mother-in-law. I only mentioned it was a house for living together with my mother. As I answered my brother's question, my mother-in-law suddenly covered her face with both hands. I had believed that my son, Steve, was the owner of this house. After caring for your mother, I thought it was my turn to live with you. But taking care of an unfamiliar elderly person is difficult. So I thought I would wait until your mother-in-law passed away. When I received the news of her death from my son, I thought it was my turn and terminated my apartment lease. Now, I have nowhere to go. I didn't expect such a rash action without any promise. Either way, after my sister and her husband move out, this house is intended for us to live in. I'm sorry, but we have no intention of living with a stranger who's been disrespectful to us. Please leave. My mother-in-law might be pretending to be humble, but her words revealed contempt for our mother. My brother, too, avoided yelling directly at my mother-in-law, a figure related to me, but his anger was gradually rising, and his voice became lower and colder. When my mother-in-law looked at us for help, we reiterated that she should leave. Actually, due to Steve's job, we will be moving abroad soon. Yeah, Mom, you know I work for a multinational company, and there's always been a possibility of overseas assignment, right? We've talked about this possibility before. We had decided to continue caring for my mother until we moved abroad, a decision discussed with my brother, and Steve supported it. Unfortunately, with my mother's passing, we will follow the original plan, and my brother and his wife will live here. Such a thing. Seeing the disappointment on my mother-in-law's face, Steve and I exchanged looks. Then, sighing, we continued. If you've terminated your apartment and have nowhere to go, how about coming abroad with us? We made the offer to move abroad, expecting her to refuse. You know, I hate flying, right? I don't even have a passport. But if you have nowhere to live, you'll have to find somewhere new. Steve said, looking slightly worried. Still, applying for a passport now would take time, and preparing for an international move can't be done quickly. We're leaving soon, so it's probably impossible. My mother-in-law's previous energy had faded, and she appeared dejected. Seeing this, Steve made a suggestion. Should I talk to John? Wait, I can't go to John's place. Don't contact him. My mother-in-law quickly said, John is Steve's brother. My mother-in-law was eager to live in our house, but adamantly refused to live with Steve's brother, John. But if you have nowhere else to live, what choice do you have? What do you think? As Steve spoke, my mother-in-law, unable to argue, looked down, then suddenly looked up and said, Then, can you just give me money? I absolutely refuse to live with that daughter-in-law. Steve sighed in exasperation as he began to make a phone call. My mother-in-law shrieked, trying to snatch the phone away, but as soon as the call connected, she backed off. It seemed that John's wife had agreed to take my mother-in-law in. Afterward, we hurried to proceed with the funeral preparations and other necessary arrangements, leaving the rest to that side of the family. When my brother and I returned to the living room after finishing our conversation, my mother-in-law was silently sitting on a chair, apparently displeased with the idea of going to John's house. Now we can finally start preparing for the funeral. We still have a little time, so let's get the preparations going and wait, Steve suggested. Agreeing with his proposal, the three of us started listing what needed to be done. An hour passed, and when the doorbell rang, it was John's wife standing at the door. "Hi there." She had the appearance of a typical gal from a bygone era, dressed in eye-catching clothes, wearing a top with a deeply open neckline that day. She's straightforward with her opinions and, despite her casual appearance, dislikes in fairness, being both direct and friendly. It seemed she would get along well with my brother. However, my mother-in-law harbored a dislike for her. "My condolences for your loss." I rushed over, "So please excuse my attire," she said politely, which surprised me a bit. However, as soon as John's wife was led into the living room and saw my mother-in-law, she changed her demeanor and said, "Oh, come on, Grandma, cut it out already. Don't trouble Steve and Tracy anymore. Let's go home," and she helped my mother-in-law to stand up. Originally, we had discussed living together, so if you had just agreed to that proposal from the start, you might have been spending your days more peacefully by now. The pride of the elderly can be quite formidable. Anyway, excuse us for taking her away. We've caused you enough trouble for today. With that declaration, she took my mother-in-law away promptly, apologizing deeply as they left. Actually, my brother and his wife had been proposing for a while that our mother live with them. Despite her unconventional appearance, she's incredibly caring, and when they got married, she promised, "We'll take good care of her." However, our mother refused to live with her, choosing to live alone consistently. "She's really got a unique personality," Steve said, reflecting on this with a bittersweet smile. "There's goodness at her core, and my brother is also reliable. So it's likely that our mother will find stability in her new home with them." As Steve predicted, my mother-in-law started living with John and his wife without any issues. With John's wife around, it became difficult for her to behave selfishly, and she now seems to be living relatively peaceful days. Perhaps this somewhat strict environment suits her. She's always complaining, but she never actually tries to do anything on her own and doesn't seem to want to live by herself. "She just likes to grumble," Steve said, watching his mother's behavior with a resigned chuckle. The house we built is now inhabited by John and his wife, according to the plan we had set. It has become a warm space that deepens family bonds, with John's wife's parents recently joining the household, starting a multi-generational living arrangement. As agreed upon from the beginning, the mortgage is now shared between John and his wife's parents. I am currently in Paris, France, where my husband, Steve, was assigned for work. Initially, there was some apprehension about living in an unfamiliar land. Fortunately, my proficiency in French proved to be a blessing, allowing me to quickly adapt and integrate into the local community. Leveraging my experience as a French teacher in the US, I've taken up teaching English in France. The work environment here differs from the US, with reasonable working hours that allow for personal time. With guaranteed weekends off, Steve and I now enjoy much more time together, experiencing new stimuli every day and leading a more relaxed life. Thus, we are spending our days meaningfully in a different environment from the US, learning and enjoying life in a new land.